Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frata Eleftheria, and tonight I'm going to be revisiting my old belief system of Thelema. And I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I like about Thelema. Because, I've spoken about my faith journey on this channel before, and the fact that I used to consider myself a Thelemite not so long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things, and why I decided that spiritual philosophy was not one that I wanted to follow anymore. And so I've inadvertently focused on the negative aspects of Thelema as a result of that. But there's also a lot of positive things about the Thelemic spiritual philosophy, which I think deserve to be highlighted. And I've been reflecting on that again recently, as I reflect upon the Western esoteric tradition, the different kinds of belief systems that are out there as part of that tradition, the evolution of my own beliefs, and why I held certain beliefs in the first place. So tonight I want to explore the things that attracted me to Thelema, and the things that I think are quite good about that spiritual philosophy, and things that we can take out of it even if we don't consider ourselves Thelemites. So that is what we'll be discussing tonight. So when I first discovered magic, I became a Thelemite not long after that. I started dabbling in the occult in 2007, and in 2008 I joined the OTO. I was initiated as a Minerval, and I still have the copy of the Book of the Law that they gifted to me on the occasion of my Minerval initiation. Still to this day. It's not quite 20 years old, but it's getting there. It would be about, 17 years old. So I still have this. It's still something that I treasure. And the Book of the Law is really the foundational text of Thelema. It's got most of the core tenets in there. True will doesn't appear in there, although you could infer true will reading between the lines of the text. But most of the core principles of Thelema are in there, including the famous motto, "Do what thou wilt." A much misinterpreted motto as well, I might say. So I studied this book a lot when I was a Thelemite and based my spiritual philosophy on that. The Book of the Law is a revealed text. So Aleister Crowley, the famous or infamous 19th, 20th century magician from England, travelled to Cairo in 1904, so the story goes, and made contact with a spiritual being called Iwas, who then dictated the Book of the Law to Crowley in his hotel room while he transcribed it. And it was an example of automatic writing. And so that became the basis of Thelema. And while much of the teachings of Thelemic orders, such as the Ordo Templi Orientis or the AA, come from the systems of instruction of earlier magical orders, those practices are also undertaken with an underlying spiritual philosophy in mind, and that is the philosophy of Thelema as espoused in the Book of the Law. But before I go any further, I just want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I have appeared on the Hermetic Podcast with Frata RC and done an interview with him, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So I will leave a link to the Hermetic Podcast episode where I did the interview in the description below. I've also recently done an interview with the Grimerica Show, and I'll leave a link to that interview in the description below as well. But now, on to the rest of the video. So the first thing that I really like about Thelema is the centrality of will in Thelemic philosophy. There are a lot of religions out there that are incredibly fatalistic. They see human beings as small, we're just made from dirt and insignificant. In some religions we have a degree of free will, but in others they can be very fatalistic, and we are just the victims of circumstance. Maybe we'll do better in our next life, but there's nothing we can do about our circumstances in this life here and now. And then in other ones, in other religions, we're taught to be humble and grateful for everything we're given and not to ask too much from God. And that whatever God has given us is what we deserve, and we should just be happy with our lot in life. The thing that made Thelema much more appealing was that it was a more active and vigorous type of belief system, that it's up to you to go and get what you want. Don't wait for some God or some saint to answer your prayers. Go out and get it yourself. Exercise your will in the universe to get the outcome that you want. And that's not proud, that's not arrogant. It's actually an admirable, virtuous quality to have that attitude to life. And so that was one thing that really attracted me, because unfortunately, in the periods of my life when I've been the most Christian, I've found that I was the most ineffective at actually looking after myself in life. When I was younger, in high school, I would pray to God to give me what I deserved, and I never got it. And the situations in my life that I wanted to improve only got worse. And I didn't do anything about it because I thought that it would be challenging God's will, if I improved my situation. And even directly after I left Thelema in 2021, 2022, I was quite deep into Gnostic Christianity. And so I again took an attitude of not asking for too much and being grateful for whatever God gave me, and nothing would ever go my way. And I didn't use magic for that period because I wanted to be humble, because I didn't want to challenge the will of God and what God had given each of us and thought best for each of us. But it just led to suffering. And once I started using magic again, things suddenly got better for me again. So once I actually did things to help myself, that was the way that I was actually able to live a decent, happy life that I wanted to live. So to this day, I really believe that the emphasis on will is a good thing. And the fact that Thelema is a life-affirming philosophy rather than a life-denying philosophy is something that weighs heavily in its favor. And because of this emphasis on will, Thelema is a magical religion. So the practice of magic is a main spiritual practice within Thelema. And magic is defined as the art and science of causing change in conformity with will. You're not supposed to use magic in something like mainstream Christianity because it violates God's laws and defies God's laws. But in Thelema, it's perfectly acceptable and in fact encouraged. And another aspect of this Thelema as a will-based philosophy is the fact that it really encourages and emphasizes personal excellence. It glorifies people who push themselves to the absolute limit of possibility in terms of what they can achieve. You know, in some of these old Aeon religions, there is an overemphasis on humility. And I think that is to the detriment of one's personal advancement on the spiritual path, but ultimately the advancement of humanity on the spiritual path, because then it means that there's less examples for people to follow afterwards. And it just keeps everybody down. But Thelema doesn't make that mistake. Another thing I think is very valuable about Thelemic philosophy is its emphasis on individual freedom and autonomy. So we have a will. Our will is powerful and should be exercised. And it is our will, our individual will alone that we follow, and no other's will. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Something which comes from Rabelais, but was later appropriated within the book of the law. But it's this idea that you and you alone know the path that you must follow in life, and nobody else can tell that to you. It's about following individual freedom rather than slavishly following a dogma that somebody else has given you. That doesn't mean that there haven't been people within the Thelemic world that have tried to establish a dogma and tried to make everybody unquestioningly follow that dogma. I'm looking at you, Caliphate OTO. I'm looking at you, Gunter Motta AA. But that's not the way that Thelema is supposed to work. And it's not just your will as an individual that is important, but it's the principle of each person being able to follow their own true will freely. But this idea is embodied in the phrase from the Book of the Law, every man and every woman is a star. And this idea has been extrapolated out by Crowley to describe how each star has its own orbit, and no stars clash with other stars because they all have their own orbit that they stay in. And so if everybody just followed their will, then there would be nobody interfering with anybody else, and everything would be just great. In modern terms, you can call this staying in your lane. Everybody stays in their lane, everybody's happy. Of course, life is more messy than that in practice. There's not neat little paths that each individual person has that they can stay on, and everything will be fine. But it's a good thing to try and aim for. And it's really about that universal respect for the rights of the individual, which actually, if you look into the history of religion, is something that began with Christianity, but Thelema really takes it to new heights. But I find this idea of not interfering with anybody else's will very, very appealing, because, you know, by my nature, I'm somebody who's very anti-authoritarian. And so that is one thing that was a big draw for me going towards Thelema. I also, like to do things my own way. I don't like following rules that other people set for me, because I quite often find the flaw in the system every time. And so even when I have like a path of initiation or a type of spiritual practice that I'm following, I won't just follow it as it is. I will kind of customize it and tinker with it to make it work better for me. I might say, oh, well, I can simplify this by not doing this, or I can do this instead of this, which might work better than the original. And so I put my own kind of spin on it. And it's always the way that I've approached my spiritual path, the different schools, the different traditions that I've been a part of. And it's a very Thelemic way of being, because the belief system of Thelema is one which by its very nature you're encouraged to interpret in your own way. Of course, there's still some broad parameters that separate a Thelemic from a non-Thelemic belief, but there is a lot of room for personal interpretation, which is something I've always really appreciated about Thelema. And so there's no, in theory at least, there's not supposed to be a dogmatic religious organization that's pushing a particular interpretation onto you and telling you that you're evil or stupid or wrong if you don't accept that. So if I have, for example, a copy of the Book of the Law dating back to 2008, and chapter 3, verse 37 in my book reads, "Appear on the throne of Ra, open the ways of the Khu, lighten the ways of the Ka, the ways of the cubs run through, to stir me or still me, Aum, let it fill me, and I see no reason whatsoever why that should be any different to what I've always known it to be, then I will say fill and nothing else. And I don't care what anybody else has to say about it." And so in that respect, I still have a strong affinity with the spirit of Thelema. The third thing that I really like about Thelema is that it unlike other older religions, it does not place artificial restrictions on natural human desire. It doesn't say that any particular type of natural inclination is sinful or shameful or an abomination. It accepts human nature as it is, does not judge it, does not shame it, and looks for healthy outlets for each of the natural feelings that we have. And while there are restrictions within Thelema, they are more restrictions to do with personal discipline in order that we might become the best version of ourselves. It's not about suppressing any part of our nature, which is the way that restriction is used in other religious contexts, unfortunately. And it encourages us to eat and drink and enjoy life, enjoy all the things that we might enjoy. And there's no prohibitions on that at all. Now, that does sound quite dangerous, to have no prohibitions on that whatsoever, because there are certain desires that people have which could harm others, which might be quite perverse. And I've always been aware of that flaw in the belief system. But I think that when you're looking at repressing desire versus acknowledging desire, it's much healthier in each case to at least allow a feeling or a desire to surface, regardless of what you do with that. Because when you start suppressing things, they become frustrated, and actually that is how frustrated or perverted desire can develop in the first place, because it's not allowed to express itself naturally. There's something which distorts it in the formative period of that desire coming into fruition. So I think it is much better, just in general, if we allow desire to express itself freely and naturally, and don't attach shame to that or do anything else that might suppress that. Even if we want to change a desire, if we think that it needs to be redirected, the way that it's expressing itself isn't helping us, the first step is to at least acknowledge it. And one thing that I've always liked about Thelema is the fact that it does give you that permission to just feel what you want to feel, and it removes the guilt from that, which is a very liberating thing, particularly if you're like me. Like, I went to a Catholic school for several years, and we didn't even get to decide how long our hair could be, or if we grow facial hair, or what we get to wear, or whether our shirt is untucked. And so, as you can imagine, as soon as I was free of that environment, I spent a year partying. I took a gap year before uni, and I worked a little bit, and I just went to a bunch of 18ths, and I just partied every weekend. And it was great. It was really therapeutic to be able to freely express that desire after being repressed for so long. But I think that you don't necessarily want to live your whole life like that. It got to a point where I sort of got it out of my system, and I started to do things in more moderation again. And some things I overdid it, and I learnt my limit. For example, I cannot stand the sight or the smell of vodka anymore. But so there's always a point where expressing desire becomes excessive, and you need to have that positive restriction again. You have to have that positive structure again. Otherwise you descend into indolence. But usually if you let things unfold naturally, they will, unless you really are undisciplined, things naturally tend to sort themselves out down the track, and you naturally return to some kind of equilibrium once you've got something out of your system. But there is an important difference between just hedonism and doing whatever the hell you want versus do what thou wilt as it is expressed in Thelema. Because in spite of how Crowley actually was and how he actually put his convictions into practice, do what thou wilt does not just mean be as hedonistic as you can be in an undisciplined manner that eventually leads you to self-destruction. It actually is the strictest possible bond, as we're taught in, say, the OTO. And the reason why it's the strictest possible bond is because by doing your will, you are committing to doing only your true will and nothing else. So your will is not just following every impulse, every passion, every desire at a whim. It's actually about finding your purpose in life, finding the thing that you can do best, that is best suited to your nature, that brings you the most joy and brings you the most fulfillment, and doing only that. It is actually a very virtuous path. And so the goal of doing what you will, it is about finding that path, finding that true will, and not just about drinking and smoking as much as you can, until you fall over in the gutter. And there's another caveat to do what thou wilt within Thelema, which often seems to get forgotten by people, which is that by saying that you're only going to do your own will, you're accepting all of the accountability for making the decisions that you make, and you're accepting the consequences of your actions. And you have nobody to blame for the consequences of your actions but yourself. So if you express your will in a way that interferes with the will of another person, and you thwart their rights, and it's the wrong person to mess with, and you get blowback for that, you need to wear that. You have no one to blame for that but yourself. And if you're a true Thelemite, you will wear that, and you won't complain about what happened to you. And you will accept it graciously, which is a very difficult thing for lots of people to do. They get themselves into conflicts and then they want to play the victim. There's no playing the victim in Thelema. Playing the victim is something that is despicable in Thelema. So if you want to be strong and willful, you better be prepared to handle it. The fourth thing that I like about Thelema is that it tries to find balance. So you often find in right-hand path religions such as mainstream Christianity that they are very one-sided. It's like, this is good, this is bad, everything in the world fits into a neat category of good or bad, and you should only do the good things and never do the bad things, and that's that. And if you want to be a pure person, you will do as many of only the good things as you possibly can. But that gives you a really one-sided view of life, and gives you a really sheltered existence where you can't experience life fully and even be free to make mistakes and learn from them, or free to discover something about yourself that maybe isn't so positive and isn't just love and light, which you might need to integrate in some way. Not necessarily just accepting it as it is, because that can lead to dysfunction, but certainly finding a way of integrating it. That's something that mainstream religions such as Christianity don't do very well. Well, particularly these more Protestant varieties that you see, like in America, where everything is demonic, totally one-sided. But equally one-sided is like left-hand path philosophies, where anything Christian is bad and anything Christian is scoffed at, and it's all dark imagery all the time, and you can't do anything uncool that seems too Christian, because that's just, then you'll get judged for that. So, both of these are equally unbalanced views. One person that I knew from the OTO, who I respected a lot, who was very knowledgeable, I once asked, is Thelema a left-hand path philosophy or is it a right-hand path philosophy? And he answered that it's neither. It is the middle path. And so it's neither left-hand path nor right-hand path, but it tries to find the balance in between. And that was something that was very appealing to me. And all throughout Crowley's writings, we again see this theme of the way to find the true way of being, the true way of aligning with the divine is by finding the balance in all things, much the same way as the Taoists attempt to do. And this is very different to the traditional mainstream Christian view that to get close to God is about being pure. But Thelema is about returning to wholeness through the reconciliation of opposites, rather than casting judgment on 50% of the universe, which obviously is going to get you further away from God, is going to bring about more separation, but seems to be in the mind of many of these fundamentalist mainstream Christians somehow the way back to God. I like the Thelemic idea a lot better. I do think that Thelemic symbology does tend to overemphasize the negative or transgressive or antinomian aspects of religion. I haven't spoken much about the gods of Thelema. I've focused much more on the spiritual philosophy, but one of the main figures in Thelema is the beast 666, which is traditionally a very negative symbol. So I think, perhaps that's overdoing it with the negative transgressive symbolism, at least in my opinion. And some of the practices that are done do involve demons, such as working with the Ars Goetia, and in fact Crowley published a version of the Goetia. Anyway, the Goetia figures quite heavily in Thelemic magical practice, but it's actually a very dangerous book and not the sort of thing that I think anyone should be messing with. And so this would be another example of sometimes things are out of bounds for a good reason. We shouldn't necessarily be trying to have every single experience that we possibly can in life. Everything needs to be done with a spirit of prudence and equanimity and temperance. So that would be one thing that I would say about that. But overall, I think that it is good to be at least curious about finding out about every part of life and not being afraid of certain things, and not being too afraid to even explore or entertain certain things, because then you will live a very sheltered and stunted life. And the reason why I can say so stridently now that the Goetia is not something you should mess with is because I took it for a spin. I went there, I tried it, and I got some really terrifying results. So there's kind of a paradox there as well. You don't really know something's dangerous until you've gotten close to it, unless you've flown close to the sun, as it were. Still wouldn't recommend that anybody else do it. I made the mistakes for you. You don't have to repeat them. The other thing that I really like about Thelema is that it acknowledges that it is a difficult path and that it is not the right path for everyone. A lot of religions, the universalist religions, they say, our doctrine, our truth is right for all people at all times. The whole world should follow it. But Thelema acknowledges that this spiritual philosophy of Thelema is only suited to a very small number of people. Because the reality is, it is a rare person who can have the strength and the independence to really follow a spiritual path like that of Thelema. And I think the reason why not everyone can be a Thelemite has to do with taking a good, honest, and perhaps very confronting or controversial look at the true nature of the human race. We live in a Western society where we have freedom and democracy, allegedly. And so we have this idea of the ideal citizen of such a society being one who uses their freedom of choice, who uses their free will, who has rights and exercises those rights as an individual. But I think that the reality is that there's very, very few people in society, even a free and open society such as the West, there's very few people who actually embody that ideal. As a matter of fact, most people don't want freedom. The overwhelming majority of people whether they acknowledge it or not, want to be led. They want somebody to tell them what to do. They want somebody to give them the answers so they don't have to think too hard for themselves. And they want to follow the crowd. That's mutually exclusive with the spirit of Thelema. But it's the way that the majority of people are. How many times have you been in a group, whether it's at school or at work or in a family, where somebody has made a decision on behalf of the group, or a decision which affects the group, which is negative or just wrong in some way? And when that happens, how many people actually speak out against it? How many people actually stand up and say, actually, you know what, that's wrong. I'm not going to do that. Most people won't want to rock the boat. They won't want to put themselves in a situation where they might be unsafe in some way, or they might suffer reputational damage. They're much more likely to just go along with other people. They're much more likely to just value social acceptance over doing the right thing. And unfortunately, that is just the state of humanity. We are overwhelmingly herd animals, but that is no way for a free person to live. And Thelema is for the person who wants freedom. Don't get me wrong. I think that every person should be a free individual who makes their own decisions. I just don't see how the majority of people would ever make that choice. I think that it's a choice that they're afraid to make. I think that they would prefer to be safe and secure and compliant, and to be seen to fit in, than to be free. That's just what I've observed. But Thelema acknowledges this reality, and it acknowledges that it is only for those who truly want to pursue the freedom of their will, for those who want to be daring, who want to exercise their will freely, no matter what the rest of the world is doing. But I do think that another flaw or weakness within Thelema as a philosophy comes to the forefront here. And the reason I say that is because Crowley presented Thelema as the spiritual philosophy that would become the dominant spiritual philosophy during the new aeon. Which is to say that in 1,000 years, the whole world would be living in the Crowleyanity, which is actually something that he said at one point. But the problem with that is, Thelema, I don't think, is a spiritual philosophy that can ever have a mass appeal. For the reasons that I've outlined. It's too difficult to grasp, it's too hard to put into practice, and it's frankly too complicated. Although it seems simple. Anything that is going to become the dominant new religion has to be something that is simple and easy to understand, and where you can just follow the instructions of a holy text if you need to, if that is the path that you choose, rather than trying to find the answers for yourself. Whereas I think Thelema kind of forces you to find the answers for yourself. Some people just aren't like that. Some people just are here to learn, and that's fine. We love those people as well. It's just Thelema isn't really the right path for such people, and it means that it will probably never take on the character of a mass religion. So as you can gather from this video, there's actually a lot of things that I really appreciate about Thelema, and a lot of things that really resonate with me in Thelema. But I still decided that it wasn't the spiritual philosophy for me, and it really comes down to one issue. When I think about it now, it really comes down to one difference of opinion that I had with Thelemic philosophy, but it is a very consequential difference of opinion. In fact, this one thing is a deal breaker for me if a religion doesn't respect it. And the thing that I'm talking about is the importance of compassion. The Book of the Law, Thelema, is very critical of compassion. It describes it as the vice of kings. It makes a mockery of people who practice compassion. And while I can see the argument for why an excess of compassion is wrong, that love and compassion has to be at the center, at least that is what I have come to believe and what I have come to learn as a result of my own spiritual journey. And I can't see a way of making that gel with Thelema, which is very critical of compassion towards other human beings. But sometimes it can't just be about your will. Sometimes we do have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Even in the context of family, now that I'm a father, I can't always do my will. It's but it's good because I'm nourishing another human being, and I'm raising another human being, and that is something that is good for society and good for that other person. And that's more important. That bigger picture and that sacrificial love towards others is something that I feel is missing from Thelema and is sort of dismissed as just Christian or old Aeon thinking. And that really is the fundamental difference of opinion that I have with Thelemites, and why I eventually decided it wasn't for me. But having said that, there are a lot of good things about Thelema, and I've given a bit more detail about where I stand on Thelema today, and hopefully given you an appreciation of many of the positive qualities of Thelemic philosophy, which is something that you will come across a lot in your studies of the Western esoteric tradition. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit the notification bell so YouTube actually notifies you of my new videos, hit join or thanks to support me further, and leave your comments down below. And there's a link to my merch store in the description below if you want to support me by buying merch such as this. So those are all the ways that you can support me. But thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.